Hello, I'm Sarah Russell, former producer of the ADHD Skills Lab. I'm thrilled to introduce my latest project, the Neurodivergent Report, an educational podcast dedicated to empowering neurodivergent individuals with accessible scientific knowledge and amplifying their exuberant stories. In each episode, we'll explore topics like the genetics and heritability of neurodiversity, alongside practical strategies for managing executive dysfunction and emotional dysregulation. Together, we can learn to heal in community. However you are able to engage, thank you for being here.
Hello, everyone. Today, I am super excited to be talking to Don Orkoskey. Don is a photographer, photography teacher. He works out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He works with neurodivergent young adults as a part of a vocational program. And he's also currently working on his first ebook on photography. Don, thank you so much for coming and talking with me today. I'm really excited to talk about all of the little threads.
Yeah, I'm super excited to be here, Sarah. I really appreciate you having me on.
Awesome. Thank you. So let's get right to it because you're a photographer. And specifically, the storytelling aspect of photography is really important to you, as storytelling is important to me, sort of shared values. So do you want to sort of explain how you see photography as a form of storytelling, especially for neurodivergent people?
Yeah. I think for me, because I can kind of ramble on and go off on tangents, photography has always been this way to feel more grounded in terms of storytelling, because I can focus on the subject, any action the subject is doing, any sort of descriptive things that are included in that, and any other kind of object. So to me, it's like a sentence structure, right? In that way, like the idea of a picture being worth 1,000 words. I'm like, okay, but a good picture to me is worth like a sentence, right? So, yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. And I think so often that I'm not alone in terms of my neurodivergence, in terms of, struggling with getting thoughts out or conveying information to people. And really that's what photography and art in general is, right? So it's conveying information. It's saying something that we want to say.
Communication device.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go back to the sentence structure thing too, because as neurodivergents, we really need an example. We really need a template. That's one of the really super common accommodations that we give to like ADHD children, is that we show them what a completed assignment looks like, so that they know. Would you say that the lens ever becomes sort of a buffer between you and the real world?
Yeah, absolutely. Being behind the camera, you often are kind of in the spotlight because people see you with the camera and they're kind of like, oh, this person's doing, you gather attention. But when you're in the moment and you are focusing on your exposure and your composition and getting things in focus and so on and so forth, you kind of, you can more easily ignore that stuff and kind of hyper focus on what you're doing. And actually, I think back to, I don't remember if it was Dorothea Lange or Margaret Bourke-White. One of them was at the liberation of one of the concentration camps at the end of World War II. And she said that she had to lift her camera up to her face to avoid just breaking down at the horrors that she was witnessing, right? But having that camera gave her this sort of blanket where she was able to just focus on doing her job and recording what was happening, right? And it's so important that we have those, that evidence, right? So, yeah.
Amazing. I'm just thinking about my own mother, she's definitely presents ADHD, but I've started to suspect more autism behaviors from her now. And she's always one of those who wants to take pictures of everything. And I've wondered if it's easier for her to experience life through taking pictures rather than directly interacting with it.
That's a good hypothesis. I think it's probably the case. I know, because I teach so many neurodiverse.
Yeah, have you seen that?
Yeah. I definitely have seen that. For example, I've worked with one student who has a lot of support needs, and they're very into AI. Like, we started with learning photography. They have a YouTube channel, and they have, Instagram and TikTok, and they have a bunch of followers for the stuff that they do.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, like many more followers than me. So, but they're very like into their niche that they're working on. But I realized when we started doing these AI prompts that they were really focused on the subject. And I said, okay, but you have to put that subject in the context. Like, where is it? Where is this taking place? What's the background? And I think that because we can hyper focus, and we can, something can grab our attention. Being able to then have a photo of it and step back and go, oh, okay, this is everything that was happening, is super helpful.
This is just reminding me of all the research, like, you experience like a million pieces of stimuli, and you can only actually absorb so much.
Yeah, and it's been a lot of fun, not just working with the young adults that I work with, but also just working with, retirees, people of all ages, essentially, and seeing how common neurodiverse traits really are. Right. I think despite the spike in diagnosis, I think we are really, really underdiagnosed. So.
Absolutely. The research shows that when awareness of the symptoms enters into a region or a community, then they do see sort of an increase in diagnosis. But it's not because people are like imagining it. It's because now they know, oh, I have a common cold. Like, oh, this is strep throat, that sort of thing. Instead of just like, oh, I'm lazy and I'm late all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, my father, for his entire working life, made 2 peanut butter and grape jelly sandwiches for his lunch. Like, that is, I think, probably since childhood has been his lunch. And, no one ever stepped back and went like, are you sure you don't want anything else? Or, like I said, like, maybe this is a sign of something, right? And like myself, he has long been self-employed because that's, just much easier for him.
I wonder if the peanut butter sandwich is sort of reducing the cognitive burden of making a decision. It's just one way that we accommodate ourselves, self-employment being another way we accommodate ourselves in the society. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So self-employment is another area that you sort of know a bit about because you are that thing. Did you sort of become an entrepreneur before getting diagnosed? Or...
Yeah, absolutely. Long before getting diagnosed. I wasn't diagnosed until I was in my 40s. I worked for a lot of other photographers. I had an office job for years. And before that, I worked in retail while I was in college. And it was miserable and really hard. Like, I constantly have funny thoughts come up in my head. So I would walk around smiling and people were like, he's just so happy and so nice. But really, I just have these like things that I want to laugh out loud about.
It's a comedy show in your head.
Yeah. But
it's the Laugh Factory.
Yeah, exactly. So, and two, just like, following arbitrary rules. Like, so when I got the opportunity to go out on my own and open my own business, I jumped at it. And it has been so much easier to work for myself and to set my own agenda. I mean, there are massive challenges too, don't get me wrong. But when you recognize that, like, unlike a 40-hour work week, you're not charging for 40 hours worth of work every week. Like, you would go nuts if you were doing that. So I went from being used to like, okay, this is how valuable my time is when I'm actually doing something for someone else, to then being at like $20 an hour. And I was like, my time is worth so much more than this. and I've got all these arbitrary rules to follow, and I've got to learn all this stuff. And, I'm expected to be like this way on the phone. And, it was just, it was too much. So I didn't last very long in that position.
The cost benefit analysis just wasn't mathing. Yeah, the social cost, the sensory cost for some people. Gosh, there are so many reasons why neurodivergents struggle in the workplace.
The sensory thing is huge. Yeah. I had, I was in this customer facing role where there were two of us behind the same desk dealing with customers coming in, and we were supposed to be able to talk on the phone at the same time, or talk to a customer in person while our coworker was on the phone. And it was like, I can't do this.
So much words,
right?
How?
Yeah, I'm like, I'm too wrapped up in whatever conversation, because they seem like they're having a fun conversation, and I'm just distracted by it. I can't deal with the person standing in front of me.
Auditory processing, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, interesting. Okay. Well, when did you sort of know it was time to start your business?
So I had, I actually went to school for photography, and I tried to go on for photojournalism, and the university setting does not work for me. It really doesn't. And being undiagnosed, it was impossible. So I struggled. I spent 8 years in college, and I have an associate's degree to show for it. So, but when I was finishing, my ex-wife was starting in pharmacy school, and she couldn't work, so I had to provide for us. So the photography took kind of a back seat, and that's when I was working at that office job. And then when she finished pharmacy school, I was friends with some coworkers. We went out for lunch. We always ate lunch together. It's a Friday, 1:00 in the afternoon. And I was like, yeah, now that my wife is graduating from pharmacy school and is going to get a good job, I can, maybe think about going back to doing photography full time. Monday morning, my boss, who normally came in after me, was already in his office. And as soon as he heard me come in, he was like, hey, I heard you're leaving us. So, yeah. So betrayed by my work friends. But I told him, I said, I'm not running out the door. I want to do this, but it gave me a sense of freedom.
Wow.
That I didn't have, because I was like, I don't have to do this job. I can, go and, I brought in money while my wife was in school. So, it's her turn kind of to let me get things rolling again. And I was able to say, look, I was doing two people's jobs, and they were advertising as we do, as everyone does these days, but they were advertising for one of the positions. And I said, look, this actually could be done by one person. Why don't you take the money that you're paying me and what you have for that job and roll it into one, and then you'll actually get people who are willing to do this job. And they didn't do that. They didn't take my advice. But I said, I'll stay and train, and I'll do whatever. And it was, I left on really good terms, and they ended up hiring me to do some photography work a few years after that. So yeah. But I was definitely ready. I was beyond ready. Just being in an office every day from 7 to 3:30 it didn't work for me. And again, this was long before I was diagnosed, so I had no idea what how my brain worked.
So how did you get diagnosed then? If it wasn't when you started your business, and so what life transition was it? COVID, honestly. It was the lockdown.
Because we clump together, right? Neurodivergent people tend to be friends with neurodivergent people. And so I, during lockdown, which was 13 years after I started my business, I started paying attention to the memes that my friends were posting, and they were all from neurodivergent accounts. And I was like, maybe this means something. And so I was doing therapy at the time. I still am. But I said, I'm seeing all this stuff. What do you think? And she was like, oh, you don't know that you have ADHD? She was like, I just assumed that you already knew that. And I was like, no.
Wow.
So I did get tested. I know that that's really hard for most people. That's another thing that being self-employed has been great with, because like I have to answer the phone because it means that there's money on the line, right? So I had scheduled an appointment. It was like 9 months from the date that I scheduled it. And I got a call like 3 months later, and they were like, hey, we have an opening because somebody canceled, and you're we've called like this list of 20 other people, and you're the first person that picked up. And I'm like, that's because I have to. I have to answer the phone. So,
ooh, that's a benefit of working for yourself. Provides you with that reframe. Like, ooh, there could be money, instead of, ooh, someone's looking for money. But did anybody else sort of in your life suspect maybe, or was there ever like signs from teachers or?
Yeah, looking back, like, it's one of those things when you get diagnosed as an adult that you go through like the stages of grief. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so like I got really angry after realizing like how many, like I had a teacher who she like bent over backwards to try to help me, but she didn't know because, she, I'm like at the older end of when they started diagnosing kids, right? Like I remember my cousin who's like 10 years older than me, I think a bit more than that. When she had her son, he was diagnosed at like 7 or 8, and we had all gone to my aunt's place after like Easter brunch or something like that. He's sitting there like playing a Game Boy. That's how long ago it was. And after, on the drive home, my parents were like, oh, they say he's got that attention deficit disorder, and that's because they just give him the video game. So now they got him all drugged up, and and like were really dismissive of his diagnosis. And so there was no way that they were ever going to like take all the trouble that I got into as a kid and think like, oh, maybe this is genetic. Maybe there's something here. So no, there was so many things looking back. But again, like my parents were just like beyond that age of like, in the pediatricians were like beyond that age, and the teachers were all like beyond that age where like they were starting, or I guess before that age, where they were starting to learn like, oh, this is what we should watch out for, and this is what we should talk
sort
about.
Of back then it was like bootstraps philosophy, and now we're more social and emotional learning. But yeah, I definitely see there has been a huge social shift in the last, gosh, math.
Yeah, somewhere, 35 to 40 years. Because it was, like I said, like he was.
Well, because we even like we learned stuff, but then we kept learning, but some people stopped. Yeah. Like some of the doctors had already learned what they learned. And it's really hard to sort of challenge those misconceptions. Like, for example, until 2013, ADHD was considered to be a childhood disorder. You could not diagnose it for an adult.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wild. That was 12 years. That was 12 years ago.
Right. Yeah. No, I had I was truant in high school. Like my parents split, and I was like a little juvenile delinquent. No, but I had been sent to see a psychiatrist, and he was like, you're lazy, you're not going to school, like why aren't you going to school? And I'm like, I didn't want to tell him that about the trauma that I was actually experiencing, and that I was reacting to, in addition to the undiagnosed ADHD. But he was like, okay, I'm going to he put me on Paxil because he was like, you're lazy. And like I ended up having 2 manic episodes on Paxil because, I'm neurodivergent and I don't remember to eat all the time, especially then, and didn't remember to like hydrate properly. So yeah, I had 2 like pretty bad manic episodes, and I was like, I don't want to take this medicine anymore.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely medication can make it tricky to know like what is really going on in a person. Like I have been on meds for different things, you know, anti-anxiety, antidepressants. I've had I've tried the stimulants. We tried mood disorder stuff. And I can say that my symptoms present differently under all of those different treatments, which makes a lot of sense. And when I brought that up to my therapist who does these assessments, she's like a doctor level. She said, well, yeah, I tell people all the time when they come in for these assessments that it's not going to be accurate if they're currently already medicated.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Because they're not presenting as themselves.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the subjectivity of this all is problematic. The shame around this particular diagnosis that you get is also like unnecessary. We're gonna leave that in the past, I hope.
I hope so. Who knows with the current situation politically in the United States. But yeah, and I know so many neurodivergent women, especially, who were diagnosed with like bipolar or like all sorts of different things before finding out that no, it's ADHD, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and so the stigma with, you know, like BPD and stuff like that people get labeled with, and then find out like, you know, no, I've got like, you know, PTSD and ADHD and autism spectrum disorder, you know, whatever it is. It's like, and not that I'm, you know, trying to disparage anybody who really has BPD or bipolar, because those are super difficult things to, you know, to deal with. But the number of misdiagnoses is just wild to me.
And it's extremely harmful. I think that, you know, people get their panties in a twist about people being over-medicated for ADHD. And then they forget that there are people being misdiagnosed with bipolar and being put on lithium for the rest of their lives.
Yeah. Yeah.
What we don't care about those consequences? Or, I mean, it reduces the hysteria in society, so we're not going to complain.
Yeah.
We're going to pick and choose which meds we stigmatize, guys.
Yeah, apparently SSRIs
awesome.
Now, so that's the
listen.
only thing. Yeah.
This is wild. If they want to take my antidepressants away, that's fine. But yikes.
Yeah. I think we're all gonna.
I'm gonna need to rely more heavily on my external coping mechanisms. Right? Earlier we were talking a little bit about breath work and stuff, and I wonder if sort of photography serves as a coping mechanism for you in some way, because I would love to tap into that resource.
Yeah, I think photography definitely works as a coping mechanism. I have like general social anxiety issues. Mm-hmm. I'm an event photographer, so I go to like conferences and conventions that have like, you know, 1,000 people at them or 4,000 people at them. And having that camera means that I've got something to do, right? I can look at the pictures. I have a job. I can look at the pictures I just took. You know, like you see how many people just like are constantly looking at their phones, and it's like I have something else in my hand to look at, and I have a purpose for being there. So I'm not worried about small talk or, you know, awkward conversations. None of that stuff, because I have this, you know, this buffer. And in addition to that, I love nature and wildlife photography. It's like my biggest passion. And if I'm having a rough time, I don't care what the weather is. I will go out in the woods, and it just, it's so self-soothing to just go look at birds or squirrels or whatever I could find running around, and it helps me reset. It really does.
Do you sort of pick a subject like a squirrel or something and then go with that? Or how do you structure your sentences, Don?
Well, you know, I mean, we can create a story from scratch, right? And things like commercial photography, you can kind of do that where you're building something, right? like if you're doing like an ad for Nike, like you figure out like what type of models you want and where you want them placed and what that background is, right? And you're really constructing that entire thing, normally with a team, but
yeah, sure.
But then you can also like, think about what I tell a lot of my students is when we start telling stories, we're no good at it. Like think about listening to a toddler tell a story. They went to the park and blah, blah, blah. And you're just waiting for like them to get to the point, basically.
I'm that story. Toddler.
I'm that toddler too when I'm talking. But we can talk about our days, right? And we can say like, oh, I saw this happen, right?
Sure.
So nature photography to me is a lot like that, where it's like, oh, I saw this squirrel and it was, so cute, or I saw this bird and here's what it was doing. But that doesn't mean that there's not more that goes into it, because I've been doing it so long that I'm looking at the background. I'm looking where the light's coming from. I'm thinking about how much to zoom in and crop out. And I'm watching for that behavior, right? Whether that's like woodpecker, like going after a little insect, or, I recently saw two red-shouldered hawks like hanging out next to each other on this branch when I was on a trip in Williamsburg, Virginia. And, it's such a cool it's such a cool like set of pictures that I have of these two just kind of like looking awkwardly at each other. I think they're probably siblings or maybe even a mated pair, though I think I don't know. But anyhow, and so like trying to figure out what that story is and tell that story, or think about how, like what I'm bringing to it and what I want to say about it. Right. It's a process. Right. So, and I think because it's not just my story as a storyteller, I have a lot of say about it, but also I'm telling their story. Not that these hawks cared. Right. Like, but, but it's still like they're a big part of that story, right? They're much more upfront in that story than I am as the storyteller, right?
But yeah, that's interesting. I'm just reflecting on like different lengths I've gone to get like the right shot, Yeah. I also want to ask you if you noticed any changes in your art after you were diagnosed, like, or your relationship to it, or how did that transform you?
I think that around the time that I was diagnosed, I was I was seeing my therapist for some childhood trauma, and it was during the pandemic, so things were pretty slow. My wife was, we're both on lockdown, right, together, and she was on she's finishing her dissertation right now, but she was on I don't remember what they're called. Basically, she had a break for that semester, for that whole year, where her, she was still funded, but she was able to just work on her dissertation. So we spent a lot of time together, and she was so incredibly supportive of me. And prior to us getting together, I had gone through a pretty rough divorce, and also just was hanging out with people that were not really good for me. So like one of the people I was hanging out with talking about storytelling referred to my stories as Don length stories. So as a derogatory term. So being with this person who was super supportive and really helped me to find my self-confidence, I think also had a huge impact on how I saw my work. I did a podcast with a guy who works with entrepreneurs and takes like this psychological approach. And I was talking about how I could teach somebody in a few hours how to be a successful event photographer. And, he working through that podcast, he was like, well, it seems like you're not doing what you want to be doing, which that's true. Like what I would like to be doing is nature photography. There's just not money in that. But, but I was really sort of down on the work that I was doing. And now when I look at that work and people were still really happy with it, they were saying like, oh, you do such a good job capturing emotion and the feel of the event and blah, blah, blah. And I heard that stuff, but I wasn't listening to it. So working through all of that stuff, in addition to my diagnosis and gaining confidence and gaining an understanding of myself, all of that stuff absolutely impacted how I saw my work and how I feel, not just about my work, but about myself.
And your students, I would imagine, like it would probably be a lot easier to like help empower people to share their stories if you are also like full of confidence and also feeling empowered.
Yeah, because prior to that, I was pretty cynical. Like I approached life completely cynically. So, but once I had gone through all this stuff and learned all this stuff, I really, it really made a serious difference. And now when I have students who are lacking confidence, like I had one student who had finished a bachelor's degree in graphic design. And because of this vocational program, they were, I was asked to work with them. And what the counselor who paired us together said was, she's just not very confident. That's really her biggest thing. And like, I don't expect anybody to tell me somebody else's diagnoses, right? Like I'm not looking for that, but like a lack of confidence is not really like, that's not in the DSM, right? So
yeah.
But truly, yeah. So just building that confidence, like we did things like street photography, street portraits specifically, where we were like, okay, we're going to go up to a stranger and ask them if we can take their picture. And yeah, exactly. Like gasping. Right. And so we did one the first time. The 2-hour class, we asked one person who was this very nice and smiling person at a bus stop. And that was it for that lesson. And that was like a struggle. And I got that. And I was like, okay, you did it. Like next time we might do a couple more. Right.
Exposure therapy. Hey.
Yeah. But it is like, it's really tough, especially something like that, like going up to a stranger and being like, can I take your picture? Right. It's not easy to do for a lot of people. Right.
I try not to be a judgmental person, but 100% if someone came up to me and asked if they could take my picture, I would immediately judge them and be like, do I trust them? Yeah. Do I want to give this person my likeness?
Yeah. Yeah. Like, what are you going to do with this? Right.
Yeah. Why? Let's pivot to talking about advice. It's been great talking to you so far. And I really want to squeeze all of the value out of this conversation. And so I'm wondering if you have any advice to any other neurodivergent creatives, maybe photography people specifically, or just artists in general. Obviously, we all sort of struggle with our own flavor of executive dysfunction and emotional dysregulation, and that can make us inconsistent in our craft and in our business. How do you do it?
Not well.
Inconsistent. That's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say,
you're here though. So like, yeah. I don't know, you're probably doing better than you think, but continue. Sorry.
No, I think I am doing, I think I do well. Part of that is that from an early age, I, again, not diagnosed, like I would lose my key. I would not be on time. So that stuff got drilled into me to such a degree that like I show up 20 minutes early to everything.
How's your gut feel?
Right. Yeah, it doesn't feel great. But
yeah, that was an anxiety joke for everyone who didn't get it. Same.
But so those things, I don't struggle with those things because I've created these like deeply ingrained,
you've lived,
like, and taught myself to never, I mean, that's not to say that sometimes like I don't get hyper focused, but what I used to do is if I had an event at 3 p.m, I would wake up at like, 8, 9 in the morning, and I couldn't do anything else that day. Like no other work. I was just watching the clock. Right. But now, because I set alarms, because I use my calendar, and I've tried everything. I've tried like the Pomodoro method and all sorts of things like that. And I still, on occasion, I will be like, oh, shoot, I only have an hour before I need to be this place that's 15 minutes away, and will start to feel anxious. But it's much less now because I am medicated, and just repetition, I think, is again helped me with that.
Repetition is so important in learning.
Yeah. I still occasionally double book. So it's really difficult. But I've gotten much better at being aware of that and making sure I put things on my calendar so I don't do that. In terms of like advice, the other thing I think that really helps me is like I know photographers in Pittsburgh that are bringing in really, really good money, like north of, like as a business, a couple $100,000 a year. I'm not at that level. Right. And part of that is because I don't have the focus and capacity, and it's okay that I don't have those things, to grind like they do. And I don't want to grind. Like I really don't. I don't want to burn myself out, and I want to enjoy my life. And that means that I don't make as much money as I could. Right. And I'm, it's not easy to at times. Right. But like
comparison is the thief of joy.
Yeah. But I'm okay with it where I am. So, I mean, I am trying to increase my income. But one way that I learned how to do that was to be more selective and to charge more. And a lot of people are kind of scared to do that, especially with creative things, because it's like, oh, this really didn't take me that long to create. But it's not how long it took you to create that. It's how much money you need to survive. Right.
Yes.
So I tell other business owners when they're starting out and they're like, I don't know how to price my stuff. Well, what do you need to make in a year? Say 100,000. It's a nice round, easy number, right? Or 120,000 is even easier. So that's $10,000 a month, right? That you would need to bring in, which again, sounds like a whole lot, right? But then when you calculate your bills and replacing your equipment and all these other business expenses and your taxes and your insurance and your Social Security that you're paying everything for, all of that stuff, when you calculate all that stuff and then you go, okay, this is how many days I can actually, full days I can actually bill for. And that might be 3 days a month or 5 days a month or whatever it is. So you need to make that 10,000 out of those 3, 5, whatever, 8 days, whatever it is that you can handle. And when you break it down to people like that, they're like, oh, so I shouldn't just be charging $50 for this? Like, no, because it's not about what you think it might be worth because of the little bit of time you took to make it. It's about what you need to survive. And again, like I'm choosing easy numbers. So for most people, it's not going to be 10,000 a month.
Depends on where you live.
Yeah, it depends on where you live. Yeah. If you're in the Bay Area, sure, then you're probably sleeping in you're sleeping in a shoebox at that, bringing in $10,000 a month. So, God. But yeah, so I think understanding our worth and our value, and that also it's not this took me a half an hour to do. This is the culmination of everything I know going into this. And that's why it only took me a half an hour to do this. And realizing that and reframing that, so that we understand this is not just, I created this and blah, it's done, right? You're in a way asking the client to pay you back for the investment that you put into learning how to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. It took to get that good. Absolutely. That's a really important reframe for people who are creatives or who are pricing themselves.
I find that that's really the biggest struggle for most people, neurodivergent, I think, or otherwise, is that the business side of things, like it doesn't matter if you're a photographer or, you're making stuff on Etsy or, whatever it is, whatever your business is, if you're an accountant, it doesn't matter. The amount of time that you're doing stuff for clients is honestly pretty small compared to the amount of stuff that you're doing things as a business owner. So while it's great to not have a boss to tell me what to do, like photography is, 20% of my activity for the week. Right. So the rest of it is business. So, and that's it. I think that's can be comforting and a bit of a relief for some people as well, because then it's like, okay, this is stuff I'm doing on my own, or like in a partnership with somebody that I can connect with, or a really small group of people, whatever it is. And it's stuff that a lot of it you can do at a coffee shop. So if you need that like buzz around you, right, you can get that. But again, like the business side of it is such a massive part of the time, really, more than our creative, abilities.
Yeah, that really sort of separates the I just want to do this for fun from the I'm trying to actually make a living here. Because you do end up having to spend a certain amount of time doing things that you're not maybe great at, or you're not intrinsically like wanting to do. Like I've never met someone who gets really excited to do their bookkeeping. Yeah. Except for one client who was really excited to like build software to solve this problem forever. But yeah, I mean, that's a unique situation and there's always going to be outliers.
Yeah.
Because people.
Yeah. Well, and two, I think the other thing that a lot of people are probably scared about in terms of going into business is customers and dealing with customers and finding customers. But, I have so many more bosses, but I also have so much more respect from those people because I'm doing something that they need done and they're only paying for what, the thing that I'm doing. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't
And you get to choose who you work with.
Exactly. Now, at first, that is not easy to do. At first, you might need to take like every job, basically. But yeah, eventually you, when you're charging the right amount, I had a particular political action committee that I really don't support contact me and they're like, hey, we're having this event and we would like, to hire you to photograph it. And I looked at who they were and I was like, no. I said, we do not align politically in any way. So, and I told them flat out, but, and I've also had situations where, like as a photographer, I own my work, right? And I allow the client to use it for, what they need to use it for. That's part of the fee. But I've had like big clients with big legal teams that say, no, we have to own the work. And being able to say, well, if you want that, like I actually recently had a client that said that and I was like, okay, but I'm going to charge you $30,000 for you to own it. So literally that was the figure I told them. And, that got the lawyers to be like, oh, yeah, I guess if you're allowing us to do everything we need with them, then we don't really have to own them. Like, yeah, right. Like, I'm not saying I would have passed on that $30,000 if they were actually willing to pay it. but also like I had no expectation that they were going to. And I've occasionally had like, you like with anything, there's rough times in terms of dealing with people. But, people I also found are generally pretty forgiving. Like if you're like, you know what, I'm completely burned out after this and I didn't get the stuff to the client when I said I would. One, I leave a pretty big lead time. I say I'm going to have this done in 5 days, and normally it's something that will take me 1 or 2 days, and then I deliver it in 3 days, and instead, because I take a little bit of time after something big to recharge. But yeah, I think it seems scarier dealing with thousands of different bosses than it really is, because that ability to pick and choose, that happens a lot faster than I think a lot of people realize it will.
That's really helpful. Yeah, it's been really great talking to you today. And I'm so glad that we sort of finished off our conversation with like an emphasis on confidence boosting, because that's exactly how I was hoping to end today's conversation. I've sort of got some cards here. I'm going to shuffle. They're not real cards. They're pieces of paper. I couldn't find index cards, so I can't do the super satisfying shuffle. Anyway, yeah, so these are from a company called We're Not Really Strangers, and these are sort of confidence boosting. So I've just shuffled them a bit, and we're going to just do a couple and see what we like. So
I'm excited.
This one seems super cliche, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Who inspires you, and in what ways are you like them?
Oh, yeah. Cliche, but difficult, I would say. Because like my wife definitely inspires me, and maybe that sounds cliche too. But like, I see how hard she works and how driven she is, and also how creative she is and how kind she is. And I think that that's stuff that I really love. So I guess that's why we're married. Well, like we talked about, like a lack of confidence when we were in the early stages. And I remember, because she's in academia, I remember saying like, oh, these conversations that you all have when I'm in her circle, like, I'm not as smart as all these people. And she was like, what do you mean? Like, they're not necessarily smart. I mean, IQ tests are, I think, questionable. But she was like, they're not necessarily smarter. But again, I was going back to this. It takes me a while to process things. And again,
that was the worldview that you had accepted for yourself, was that you were not as smart as they were because you could not do the college the way that they could.
Yeah.
Wild.
But really, like, don't get me wrong, they have discipline, and like getting a PhD is not something that is very easy. I've seen
it's not in your top 3 priorities.
Right. But yeah, like they're good at like researching things, and they're also good at like not just spouting off BS, right? Like that's one thing I think that PhDs, even like graduate school in general, teaches people, is like, if you don't know the answer, it's okay to not know the answer, right? Don't just like whatever BS. Because like if you spend any time on the internet, or if you are out in public with people, there's constantly normally dudes like spouting like as if they are an authority on things that are just pulling it out of nowhere, right?
Wow. Awesome. I'm actually really glad I asked. Wow, what a fun tangent. Yeah. Amazing. Well, Don, where can people find you? Where can people hire you?
Yeah. So my website is wdophoto.com. And I do not just classes here in Pittsburgh, but I do online as well. I have a lot of online students. My book that I am self-publishing as an ebook will be available, I think, by the 1st of March. Yeah. And I'm on socials as, WDO Photo, as well as Orkoskey, my last name, Orkoskey. There's not a whole lot of Orkoskeys out there, so that's pretty easy to find me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on and talking to me about photography and confidence and really all things neurodivergence. It's been a pleasure.
It's been great. I really enjoyed this. And thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited and can't wait till the episode drops and I get to hear it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I hope you have a great week. Bye.
Thank you for being here. If you want to connect with the Neurodivergent Report, you can find us at ND Report Pod on Instagram, Threads, TikTok, and YouTube. If you're looking to support the show, the best thing you can do is to subscribe and leave a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. Please. You can check out ndreportpod.com for more information, or if you want to be a guest contributor. Until next time, be well, do good.